My husband texted, "I love you," while I sat less than 10 feet away watching him hand my younger sister a life insurance policy worth $10 million with my name on it. At first, I thought I had caught an affair. I thought I was watching the end of my marriage unfold across a restaurant table. I thought the worst thing a husband could do was fall in love with someone else. I was wrong. Very wrong. "Don't look now," my sister whispered, and both of them laughed. My phone vibrated. I looked down. "I love you." The message was from my husband. My stomach dropped. Because he wasn't looking at me when he sent it, he was looking directly at Chloe. I remember the way the marina lights reflected off the water that night. I remember the sound of silverware clinking against plates. I remember the smell of cedar drifting in from Lake Washington. And I remember the exact moment something inside me went cold. If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart only to discover they were hiding something from you, then this story may speak to your heart. And if it does, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, but only if this story truly resonates with you. I'd also love to know where you're watching from today. Leave your city, your country, and your local time in the comments below. I read every single one. My name is Ava Whitmore. I'm 33 years old. I live in Bellevue, Washington. And the night I'm about to tell you about was the night everything I thought I knew about my family began to crack apart. At the time, I believed I was witnessing a betrayal. I had no idea I was standing at the edge of something much darker. But before I can explain what happened at that table, I need to show you who my family was, or at least who I thought they were. The dinner was supposed to celebrate Chloe's newest real estate listing. That was the official reason. My mother had insisted we all come. Ethan sat beside me. Chloe sat across from us. My mother, Sandra Bennett, occupied the head of the table as usual, directing conversations the way conductors direct orchestras. "Can we all just take a moment to appreciate Chloe?" my mother said, lifting her wine glass. "She's worked so hard this year." Chloe smiled modestly. "Mom, stop." "No, really," Mom continued. "She's overcome so much." I lowered my eyes to my water glass. That sentence wasn't new. I'd heard variations of it for most of my life. Chloe had overcome so much. Chloe needed support. Chloe deserved understanding. Chloe deserved another chance. My role was simpler. Ava will understand. Ava is strong. Ava can handle it. I was 8 years older when Chloe totaled her first car. I helped pay for the replacement. When her marriage collapsed 3 years ago, she lived in my guest room for nearly 7 months. When she maxed out 2 credit cards trying to launch a business that never survived 6 months, I quietly paid off part of the debt because I couldn't stand seeing collection notices arrive at her apartment. Nobody asked me to, I just did it. That's what family meant to me. "Ava?" Ethan said softly. "You okay?" I looked up. "Just tired." He squeezed my hand. Warm, familiar, comfortable. The hand of a man I'd been married to for 8 years. A man I thought I knew completely. "You've been working too much," Chloe added. "You need a vacation." "Maybe," I said. She smiled. Ethan smiled. Everyone smiled. Looking back now, that's what haunts me most. Not anger, not cruelty. The normalcy of it all. The ease. The comfort. The way people can sit across from you carrying secrets while discussing appetizers. A server arrived with entrees. Conversation drifted toward housing prices, mortgage rates, and Seattle traffic. Then my phone vibrated. I glanced down. "I love you." My first instinct was to smile. Ethan sometimes sent random texts when we were in public. Little reminders, private jokes, small gestures. But when I looked up, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Chloe. Not casually, not accidentally, directly. The kind of look that lasts 1 second too long. My pulse stumbled. Chloe's phone lit up. She glanced down, then smiled. Not at me. Not at anyone else. At him. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Excuse me," I said quietly. Nobody noticed. Or maybe nobody cared. I stepped away toward the railing overlooking the marina. Boats rocked gently against their slips. A cool breeze moved across the water. I stood there staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Ethan loved me. Chloe was my sister. Families don't do things like that. Right? A few minutes later, I turned back toward the dining room windows. That's when I saw it. Ethan reached inside his leather portfolio. He removed a blue folder. He slid it across the table. Chloe immediately placed her hand over it. Protective, fast, deliberate. The movement caught my attention because it looked practiced, like something they'd done before. I stepped closer to the glass. The folder shifted slightly. Just enough. Long enough. I saw my own name, Ava Whitmore. Underneath it was a number so large my brain refused to process it for a second. $10 million. My breath caught. Chloe quickly closed the folder. Ethan glanced around the room, then leaned closer to her. I couldn't hear the words. I could only see their faces. Serious now. Focused. Careful. The kind of conversation people don't want overheard. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in through the window. My hand shook slightly. I snapped a picture just before Chloe tucked the folder into her purse. The image was blurry, imperfect, but it captured enough. My name, the number, the blue company logo at the top of the document. I stared at the photo, then back at them, then down at the message Ethan had sent only moments earlier. I love you. The words suddenly felt wrong, like they belonged to someone else, like they had never been meant for me at all. And standing there beside the dark water of Lake Washington, watching my husband and my sister exchange a document carrying my name and $10 million, I felt something I couldn't explain. Not jealousy, not heartbreak. Something colder, something quieter. Because for the first time that night, a question entered my mind that would refuse to leave. Why would my husband need to hand my sister a document connected to me in secret? And why did both of them look so nervous when they thought no one was watching? I did not go back inside right away. I stayed near the railing until the cold from the water began to creep through my jacket. The lights from the boats stretched across the dark surface of the marina, like broken ribbons of gold. Somewhere behind me, people laughed. Glasses clinked. A server carried a tray loaded with desserts. The world kept moving as if nothing had changed. Maybe nothing had changed. Maybe I was imagining everything. That was the story I told myself during the drive home. Ethan drove. I sat in the passenger seat staring out at the wet streets of Bellevue while windshield wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm. Chloe had left separately. My mother had hugged her goodbye first. As always. "You are doing great, sweetheart," Mom had told her. "I am proud of you." Then she turned to me. "Drive safely." 2 different daughters. 2 different conversations. Ethan glanced over. "You are quiet tonight. Long week. You should take some time off." I nodded. "Maybe." He turned his attention back to the road. The rest of the drive passed in silence. But my mind did not stay in the car. It drifted backward through years I usually tried not to revisit. The strange thing about old wounds is that most days you forget they are there. Then one moment arrives, one look, one conversation, one photograph, and suddenly every scar starts speaking at once. I first learned that lesson when I was 11 years old. Chloe was 3. We were standing in the kitchen of our childhood home in Tacoma. My mother had baked a chocolate birthday cake. I remember because I had helped decorate it. For nearly 2 hours, I carefully arranged tiny candy flowers around the edges. When guests arrived, everyone admired the cake. "Look what Chloe made," my mother announced proudly. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She was not, actually I started. My mother's smile disappeared instantly. "Ava." Just one word. A warning. The room became quiet. "Let your sister have this." I remember looking at Chloe. She was too young to understand what was happening, but I understood. That was the first time I learned an important rule in our family. Recognition belonged to Chloe. Sacrifice belonged to me. Over the years, the pattern repeated so often it became invisible. When Chloe forgot to submit college applications on time, I spent 3 weekends helping her complete everything. When she dropped out of her first business venture, I emptied part of my savings account to help her recover. When her marriage ended after only 18 months, I converted my home office into a guest bedroom so she would have somewhere to stay. 7 months. 7 months of listening to her cry in the middle of the night. 7 months of paying extra utility bills. 7 months of telling her she would be okay. Not once did I regret helping her. What hurt was everything that came afterward. The way people forgot. The way kindness became expectation. The way support became obligation. A few days after Chloe moved into my house, my mother stopped by for dinner. We were sitting around my kitchen island eating takeout Chinese food. Chloe had spent most of the meal scrolling through her phone. "You know," Mom said, pointing her fork at me, "it is good that Chloe has you." "Of course she does," I replied. "Family helps family." Mom smiled. "You have always been the strong one." Everyone says that like it is a compliment. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes it means nobody notices when you are struggling because they assume you will figure it out. Sometimes it means nobody asks if you need help because you are the one expected to provide it. Ethan used to notice. That was one reason I fell in love with him. Back when we were dating, he saw things other people missed. If I looked tired, he asked why. If I seemed distracted, he listened. If something hurt me, he cared. Or at least I believed he did. Somewhere over the years that changed. I cannot point to one specific moment. It happened slowly, like paint fading in sunlight. One memory surfaced as I sat in bed that night pretending to read while Ethan showered upstairs. It was Thanksgiving 3 years earlier. My family had gathered at my mother's house. Chloe arrived nearly 90 minutes late. Nobody complained. Instead, everyone applauded when she walked through the door carrying a store-bought pie. "There she is," Mom said. "We can finally start." Meanwhile, I had spent 2 days preparing side dishes. I had driven across town picking up ingredients. I had set tables, washed dishes, helped organize everything. Nobody mentioned any of it. During dinner, Chloe announced she was thinking about getting into real estate. "You would be amazing," Mom said immediately. "You have such people skills." My uncle nodded. "Natural salesperson." Then someone asked what I had been working on. I started explaining a healthcare software project. About 10 seconds into my answer, the conversation drifted away. Plates clattered. Somebody changed the subject. Nobody noticed. Nobody except Ethan. Under the table, he squeezed my hand. I remember that clearly. I remember believing that was enough. Looking back now, I wonder how many small disappointments a person can collect before they stop recognizing them as disappointments. I finally climbed into bed after midnight. Ethan was already asleep. The room was dark except for the faint glow of my phone screen. I opened the photograph again, zoomed in. My name. The number. The blue logo. The image blurred when I enlarged it further. I stared at it anyway, searching for something I could not define. Then I noticed a detail I had missed earlier. Tiny, easy to overlook. In the upper corner of the document there was a date. I narrowed my eyes. The picture quality was terrible, but I could just make it out. 8 months ago. My stomach tightened. 8 months ago. That was the same month as the accident. Not a serious accident, just a collision during heavy rain on Interstate 90. The insurance company handled everything. Nobody was injured. The memory should not have bothered me, yet suddenly it did, because I realized something strange. I could remember every detail of that day. The rain, the traffic, the tow truck driver, the coffee Ethan brought me afterward, but I could not remember signing any insurance paperwork connected to $10 million, not even vaguely. I sat upright in bed. The house was silent. Beside me, Ethan slept peacefully. I looked at him, then back at the photograph, then at the date, and for the first time, a question formed that made my chest feel unexpectedly tight. If that document was connected to me, why had I never known it existed? I barely slept that night, not because I was afraid, not yet. At that point, I was still trying to force everything into a familiar shape. An affair, a misunderstanding, a document taken out of context. The human mind will do almost anything to avoid a painful truth. By morning, Seattle was wrapped in a gray blanket of clouds. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while the coffee maker hummed. Ethan stood at the counter scrolling through emails on his phone. He looked exactly like the man I had shared 8 years of marriage with. Familiar, predictable, safe. That was what made everything so confusing. "You are up early," he said without looking away from the screen. "Could not sleep." "Big meeting today?" "Something like that." He nodded. "Try not to work too hard." The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I poured coffee into a white ceramic mug and watched steam rise into the cold morning air. A few minutes later, his phone lit up on the counter while he stepped into the laundry room. I was not trying to snoop. I wish I could say otherwise. but the screen flashed a name before going dark. Chloe. A message preview appeared. Call me when she leaves. My stomach tightened, not because of the message itself, because of how normal it seemed, how comfortable, how practiced. Ethan returned before I could process it. He picked up the phone, slipped it into his pocket, smiled. I will see you tonight. Then he kissed my forehead and left. The house became quiet. Too quiet. I stood alone in the kitchen listening to the rain. 3 hours later, I was sitting inside a conference room at our Bellevue office, trying to focus on a presentation. Numbers filled the screen. Revenue projections, licensing agreements, expansion plans. Normally this was my world, the place where everything made sense. Today I kept staring at the same slide without absorbing a single word. My assistant, Rachel, finally closed the conference room door behind everyone else. "You okay?" she asked. "You seem distracted." "Just family stuff." Rachel nodded slowly. "The worst kind." I managed a small smile. "You are probably right." After work, I drove to my mother's house in Issaquah. I did not tell anyone I was coming. Something inside me needed to observe, to listen, to see if I could spot whatever had shifted beneath the surface of my family. Chloe's SUV was already parked outside. Through the front window, I could see warm light spilling across the living room. I walked in without knocking. "Hello?" My mother's voice floated from the kitchen. "We are in here." Chloe sat at the island drinking tea. The moment she saw me, something flickered across her face. Surprise. Then it vanished. "Ava," she smiled. "What are you doing here? Thought I would stop by." "That is nice," Mom said. "You should do that more often." I almost laughed at that. My mother lived 22 minutes from my house. I was usually the one who drove over. Usually the one who called first. Usually the one who remembered birthdays and appointments and prescription pickups. But I let it go. The conversation drifted through harmless topics: property listings, grocery prices, a neighbor's retirement. Then Chloe casually mentioned a luxury condo development in downtown Seattle. "The buyers are unbelievable," she said. "Some people have money they do not deserve." Mom chuckled. "Tell me about it." Chloe stirred her tea. "Half of them got lucky. That is all." Then she glanced toward me. "No offense." The words landed softly, almost playfully, yet something underneath them felt sharp. "None taken," I replied. "Good," she smiled. "I mean, not everyone actually builds things. Some people just happen to be in the right place at the right time." My mother laughed again. I noticed she did not correct her. She never did. "Actually," I said quietly, "luck has never had much to do with it." Chloe shrugged. "Sure." There it was again. That dismissive tone, the same one I had heard in different forms for years. The assumption that whatever I accomplished somehow counted less. The assumption that my work existed in a category beneath hers. But this time something felt different. This time she seemed unusually interested in minimizing it, almost invested in it. "How is your company doing?" she asked. "Fine." "Just fine?" Her smile widened. "I always wondered exactly what you do over there." "You have never asked." Chloe laughed. "Fair point." Then she leaned back in her chair. "I guess Ethan understands it better than I do." My pulse slowed. Not faster. Slower. The way it does when something unexpected catches your attention. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Nothing." She waved her hand casually. "He just talks about business more." My mother interrupted. "Ethan is very smart." "He is," Chloe agreed. "He understands money." Neither of them noticed the silence that followed. Neither of them noticed the tiny shift inside my mind, because suddenly I remembered something. 6 months earlier, Ethan had started asking more questions about my ownership structure, my patents, my licensing agreements, my insurance coverage. At the time, I thought he was simply taking an interest in my work, a supportive husband trying to understand my world. But now those conversations resurfaced one after another. Too many, too specific, too focused on things he had never cared about before. Chloe stood and carried her mug to the sink. "Anyway," she said lightly, "some assets are worth protecting." The mug touched the counter with a soft click. A tiny sound. Barely noticeable. Yet somehow it echoed through my thoughts. because the look she exchanged with my mother lasted only a second. 1 second. Then it was gone. But I saw it. And for the first time, I stopped wondering whether something was wrong. I started wondering how long it had been happening. As I drove home through the rain-dark streets that evening, another memory surfaced. Not a conversation, not a photograph. A question Ethan had asked 3 months ago while reviewing paperwork at our dining room table. At the time, it seemed harmless, ordinary, forgettable. Now it felt anything but ordinary, because his exact words had been, "If something happened to you unexpectedly, who would control everything?" And suddenly I realized that question might have been the moment someone crossed a line they never should have crossed. I spent the next 2 days doing something I had never done before. I stopped explaining things away. For years I had been the person who found reasonable answers for unreasonable behavior. I gave people the benefit of the doubt long after they had stopped earning it. This time I forced myself to simply observe. No excuses, no assumptions, just facts. On Thursday afternoon, rain hung over Bellevue in a thin gray mist. I left the office later than usual and stopped at a coffee shop near downtown to answer emails before heading home. The place was quiet. A few students sat near the windows. Someone typed steadily on a laptop in the corner. Soft jazz drifted through the speakers. I ordered a black coffee and found a table near the back. I had been there less than 10 minutes when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered, "This is Ava Whitmore." There was a pause. "Miss Whitmore?" The voice belonged to an older man. Calm. Professional. "Yes. My name is Michael Graves." Something about the name felt familiar. "I am sorry to call unexpectedly." I realize this may sound unusual. I straightened slightly. "What is this regarding?" Another pause. "Careful. Measured. I recently came across a document connected to your name, and before any further action is taken, I felt obligated to verify something personally." My pulse quickened. "What kind of document?" "That is not a conversation I am comfortable having over the phone." I stared through the window at the rain. "Then why call me?" "Because after reviewing certain materials, I believe there is a possibility you are unaware of information that directly affects you." Every sound inside the coffee shop seemed to disappear. "Who are you exactly?" I asked quietly. "I am an attorney. Semi-retired now. Mostly fraud review and compliance work." My grip tightened around the phone. "How did you get my number?" "Public records." His voice remained steady. "Would you be willing to meet for 15 minutes? Every instinct told me to decline. Every instinct also told me this call was connected to everything that had been bothering me. "Where?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Mercer Island Community Library." I hesitated. "Why there?" "Because public places make people comfortable." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said something unexpected. "Miss Whitmore, have you ever served on the advisory board for Northwest Children's Health Initiative?" I blinked. "Yes, I thought so." His voice softened slightly. "Then I am speaking to the correct Ava Whitmore." The call ended a few minutes later. I sat motionless, staring at my phone. Northwest Children's Health Initiative was not something many people knew about. 5 years earlier, I had quietly funded several pediatric healthcare programs through company grants. It was never publicized. I preferred it that way, yet somehow this stranger knew. The next morning I arrived at the library 10 minutes early. The rain had finally stopped. Morning light reflected off wet sidewalks and evergreen trees. Inside, the library smelled faintly of paper and coffee. A small cafe occupied one corner. I spotted him immediately. Michael Graves looked to be in his early 60s. Silver hair, navy blazer, wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of man people instinctively trusted. He stood when I approached. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Graves." We shook hands. His expression changed the moment he looked directly at me. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind that comes when a puzzle piece suddenly fits. "You really do not know," he said quietly. My stomach tightened. "Know what?" He studied me for a moment. Then he sat down. "Before we discuss that, I need to ask a few questions." For nearly 20 minutes he asked simple things. Had I authorized certain reviews? Had I signed specific disclosures? Had I recently modified insurance agreements? My answers remained the same. No, no, and no. The more I answered, the more concerned he appeared. Finally, he removed a folder from his briefcase. Not the blue folder I had seen before. A different one. He opened it carefully, then stopped. His eyes lifted to mine. May I ask you something personal? I suppose. Your husband. How involved is he in your business affairs? Every alarm bell in my head went off at once. Why? Michael leaned back slowly. Because someone has been asking questions about assets connected to intellectual property holdings. I said nothing. Extremely specific questions. The library suddenly felt colder. And? He folded his hands. And the person asking those questions seemed very interested in what would happen if ownership transferred unexpectedly. The air left my lungs, not because of what he said, because of how calmly he said it, like a man discussing weather he had already seen coming. Mr. Graves, I said carefully, what exactly are you trying to tell me? He was silent for a long moment. Then he looked directly at me. I spent 35 years investigating financial misconduct. I have testified in federal court. I have reviewed thousands of cases. His voice lowered. And yesterday, when I saw your name attached to this matter, I expected to meet someone entirely different. My pulse hammered in my ears. What does that mean? He slid the folder closed. It means whoever is behind this believes you are someone they can outmaneuver. He paused. Then a faint expression crossed his face. Not fear, not concern. Something closer to disbelief. And unless I am very much mistaken, he looked at me carefully. They have absolutely no idea who they are dealing with. For several seconds I could not find a response. The library around us continued exactly as before. A teenager flipped through a magazine near the entrance. Someone pushed a cart of returned books across the floor. A coffee grinder hummed in the cafe. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary people. Yet somehow the world felt different than it had 20 minutes earlier. Michael Graves studied me quietly. He was not trying to impress me. He was not trying to scare me. That was precisely what made him believable. I think you are giving me too much credit, I finally said. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. No, I do not think I am. He reached into his briefcase again and removed a yellow legal pad. Not documents, not evidence. Notes. Years of habit compressed into neat handwriting. Before I retired, I spent most of my career helping companies protect intellectual property. He tapped the pad lightly. Patents, licensing structures, ownership disputes. I nodded slowly. And your name came across my desk more than once over the years. That surprised me. It did? Not often, but enough. His expression remained calm. You have a reputation, I almost laughed. That is funny because most people have no idea who I am. The public does not. He folded his hands. People in your industry do. I looked out the window toward the wet parking lot. The clouds had started to break apart. Thin sunlight slipped through in scattered patches. I never cared about reputation, I said. I know. That answer came too quickly. That is part of why people respect you. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he asked a question I was not expecting. Do you remember the pediatric monitoring system your company developed during the staffing shortages? I stared at him. That was years ago. Yes. How do you know about that? Because my granddaughter used it. The words settled gently between us. Michael looked away for a second before continuing. She was born premature. The hospital adopted the technology 6 months later. It changed a great deal for families like ours. I felt something shift inside me. Not pride. Something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. The project had consumed nearly 3 years of my life. Endless meetings. Research. Late nights. Most people only saw software. They never saw the children behind it. I am glad it helped, I said softly. It did, he nodded. More than you know. Another silence followed. Different this time. Less tense. Then Michael leaned forward slightly. That is why I need you to understand something. His voice lowered. The people asking questions about your assets appear to think they are dealing with someone who inherited success. My stomach tightened. And they are wrong. Very wrong. He did not smile when he said it. From what I have seen, everything attached to your name exists. Because you built it. I looked down at the table. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. Small office spaces with secondhand furniture. Investor meetings where nobody remembered my name. Product demonstrations that failed. Payroll weeks when I quietly delayed my own paycheck so employees could be paid first. None of it looked impressive from the outside. Most meaningful things rarely do. I was lucky sometimes, I said. Michael shook his head. Everyone gets lucky occasionally. That is not the same thing. He opened the legal pad and scanned a page. Your company currently holds multiple active patents. Yes. Several licensing agreements. Yes. And ownership interests connected to future healthcare applications. That is public information. Some of it is? He looked at me carefully. Not all of it. I felt my pulse quicken again. What exactly are you saying? Michael closed the pad. I am saying that if someone is trying to evaluate your worth strictly through visible assets, they are missing most of the picture. His words lingered in the air. I suddenly remembered dozens of family gatherings where relatives casually referred to my work as computer stuff, projects, meetings, office things. Nobody ever asked deeper questions, not because they were cruel, because they assumed there was nothing worth asking, Chloe especially. She had always seemed almost bored whenever my work came up, yet recently that had changed. Suddenly there were questions, more questions than usual, about ownership, about structures, about what happened if someone left a company. At the time, I had not noticed the pattern. Now I could not stop seeing it. Mr. Graves, I said slowly, how much do you actually know? He considered that carefully. Less than I would like, and more than I am comfortable with. That answer chilled me. Michael checked his watch. There is another reason I wanted to meet. What reason? Because someone else noticed irregularities before I did. My attention sharpened immediately. Who? He hesitated. A woman named Grace Morgan. The name meant nothing to me. Who is she? Senior compliance reviewer? For the insurance company? He nodded. Grace flagged several unusual requests. What kind of requests? Michael's expression became thoughtful, the kind that made her uncomfortable. I stared at him. Can I speak with her? Possibly. Possibly. Grace is careful. She has spent 30 years protecting her professional reputation. He paused. But she was concerned enough to raise questions internally. The library clock ticked softly on the wall behind us. Each second seemed louder than the last. Do you trust her? I asked, without hesitation. Michael stood slowly, gathering his things. The meeting was ending. I could feel it. Yet there was still one question I needed answered. What should I do now? He looked directly at me. Nothing. Nothing? Do not confront anyone. His tone was firm for the first time. Do not accuse anyone. Do not reveal what you know. Why? Michael slid the briefcase closed. Because people become very careful when they realize they are being watched. I stood as well. And if I stay quiet? He adjusted his jacket, then eventually someone will make a mistake. We walked together toward the library entrance. Sunlight now reflected off the wet pavement outside. Everything looked brighter than it had an hour earlier. Stranger, too. Before leaving, Michael stopped beside the doors. One last thing. What is it? He studied me for a moment. You keep thinking this story is about a document. My heartbeat slowed. Is it not? His eyes held mine. No. He opened the door and stepped outside. The document is only the thread. Then he disappeared into the afternoon light, leaving me standing there with a growing realization that whatever secret I had stumbled across was much larger than I had imagined. 3 days passed before the first crack appeared. Not in a courtroom, not in a police station, not in some dramatic confrontation. It happened in a grocery store parking lot on a gray Tuesday afternoon while I was loading reusable bags into the back of my SUV. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Ava Whitmore. A woman's voice came through the speaker. Careful. Quiet. Miss Whitmore, my name is Grace Morgan. I stopped moving immediately. Cars rolled past. Shopping carts rattled across the pavement. Yet everything else seemed to fade into the background. Michael Graves mentioned you. There was a long pause. Then you know why I am calling. I think I do. Grace exhaled softly. I normally would never contact someone directly, but some things have been bothering me for weeks. I closed the trunk and leaned against the vehicle. Tell me. Grace spoke slowly, choosing every word with care. Several requests crossed my desk regarding a policy connected to your name. My heartbeat remained steady, strangely steady. What kind of requests? Beneficiary reviews, ownership clarification, access verification. Another pause. The unusual part was not the requests themselves. What was unusual? The persistence. A cold breeze moved through the parking lot. Meaning? Most spouses ask a question once, maybe twice. Her voice lowered. This person kept asking. I said nothing, Grace continued. Different forms, different wording, same objective. Which was? Silence stretched between us. Then she finally answered. Understanding exactly what would happen if you were no longer here, I closed my eyes. Not because I was shocked. Because hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way suspicion never could. Did you tell them anything, I asked? Nothing beyond what regulations allowed. Grace sounded almost offended by the suggestion. Good, Miss Whitmore. Her voice softened. I need you to understand something. What? The questions were not coming from someone acting emotionally. I frowned. What do you mean? They were strategic. The word settled heavily. Strategic, planned, organized, thought through. Not impulse, not confusion, not curiosity, deliberate. After the call ended, I sat inside my car for nearly 20 minutes watching rain begin to fall again. Small drops at first, then more. The windshield slowly disappeared beneath moving patterns of water. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt calm, not peaceful. Calm, the kind that comes when uncertainty begins to disappear. For days I had been asking myself whether I was imagining things, whether grief, history, and old family wounds were distorting reality. Grace removed that doubt. Something was wrong. The next evening, Ethan came home unusually late. I was in the kitchen making soup when he walked through the door. Sorry, he said. Long day. That is okay. He loosened his tie. Anything interesting happened today? The question was casual. Too casual. I stirred the soup slowly. Not really. He watched me for a second longer than necessary. You seem different lately. Different how? Distracted. I smiled faintly. Work. You always blame work. His tone carried a trace of irritation. There it was. A tiny crack. For years, Ethan rarely challenged me. Recently, he seemed increasingly interested in monitoring my reactions, measuring them. Maybe I am just tired. He nodded but did not look convinced. During dinner, he brought up finances, not aggressively, just enough to be noticeable. Have you thought about simplifying some of your ownership structures? I looked up from my bowl. Why? Less complexity. He shrugged. Less stress. I am not stressed about them. Still. I waited. Ethan continued. Things happen. There was that phrase again. Things happen. The same vague language. The same strange interest in contingencies. You sound like a lawyer, I said lightly. He laughed. Too quickly. Trust me, I do not want to be a lawyer. The conversation ended there, but something important had changed. For the first time, I stopped responding emotionally. I started listening like an observer, a researcher, someone studying patterns instead of excuses. 2 days later, the second crack appeared. Chloe called unexpectedly. Hey, stranger! Her voice sounded cheerful. Bright. Artificially bright. Hi. We should have lunch. Why? A brief silence. Do I need a reason? Usually. She laughed. You always do that. Do what? Analyze everything. I smiled despite myself. Occupational hazard. Another pause. Then she asked a question that immediately caught my attention. How is the company doing? Fine. Really fine or Ava fine? What does that mean? You know. She laughed. Successful people always pretend things are normal. I stared out my office window toward the Seattle skyline in the distance. Things are normal. Good. She sounded relieved. Genuinely relieved. The reaction was small, but I noticed it. When the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Chloe had not asked about me. She had not asked about my health, my marriage, my life, only the company. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet even then I did not yell. I did not accuse. I did not storm into anyone's house demanding answers. That is not how truth works. Truth does not need volume. It does not need rage. It only needs time. The following Monday morning, Michael Graves called. "I have news." "Good news?" "Potentially." I leaned back in my chair. What happened? His voice remained calm. Someone made a mistake. For the first time since this entire situation began, I felt the balance shift. Slightly. Not enough to celebrate. Not enough to feel safe. But enough to know something important. The people who believed they controlled the story were beginning to lose control of it, and they did not even realize it yet. Michael did not tell me everything over the phone. He never did. "Can you meet this afternoon?" he asked. "Same place?" "No." A pause. Somewhere quieter. 3 hours later, I was sitting across from him in a small conference room above a law office in downtown Seattle. The room overlooked Elliott Bay. Ferries moved slowly across the water beneath a sky the color of brushed steel. Michael placed a folder on the table between us. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he studied me for a moment. "How are you holding up?" It was such a simple question that it caught me off guard. Better than I expected. He nodded. "Good." Then he opened the folder. Inside were several pages of correspondence. Emails. Notes. Internal review records. Nothing dramatic at first glance. Yet Michael looked at them the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. "The mistake I mentioned?" he said. "It was not one mistake. What was it?" "Pressure." I frowned. "Pressure?" He slid one page toward me. "People can maintain a story for a long time when everything is going according to plan." He tapped the document. "The moment they become nervous, they start making decisions emotionally." I read the page, then another, then another. Slowly, a picture began to form. Requests that contradicted earlier requests. Questions that conflicted with previous statements. Timelines that no longer matched. Small inconsistencies. The kind most people would overlook. The kind investigators never do. "Someone changed their story," I said quietly, more than once. Michael leaned back, and not everyone involved changed it in the same way. A chill ran through me. "Meaning?" "Meaning the people who were cooperating are no longer perfectly aligned." Outside the window, a ferry horn echoed across the water. Long, low, distant. I looked down at the papers again. They are arguing. That would be my assumption. For the first time since this began, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, relief, because lies require teamwork. Truth does not. Later that evening, I was sitting in the living room reading when Ethan walked through the front door. The moment he saw me, he seemed startled. Just for a fraction of a second. Then his expression returned to normal. "You are home early. So are you." He loosened his tie. "Meeting got canceled." I nodded. "How unfortunate." He looked at me carefully. "Everything okay?" "Of course." Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty. It vanished almost immediately. But I saw it. For years, Ethan had always known exactly where he stood with me. Now he did not. That uncertainty seemed to bother him more than any argument could have. The next morning, Chloe called. Not unusual. The tone of the call was unusual. "Have you talked to Ethan?" she asked immediately. No greeting. No small talk. I looked out the window of my office. Rain streaked the glass. About what? Silence. Then, nothing. "You called me for nothing?" "I was just asking." Her voice sounded strained, tight, as if she had not slept well. "You seem nervous." Another silence. Longer this time. "Why would I be nervous?" "That is what I am trying to figure out." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You are imagining things." The call ended less than a minute later. I sat there staring at my phone. Then I remembered something Michael had said. People become emotional when pressure appears. 2 days later, my mother called. That almost never happened. Usually I called her. "Ava." Her voice sounded distracted. "Are you busy?" "Not really. Have you spoken with your sister?" There it was again. Not how are you? Not how is work? Chloe. Always Chloe. A little. My mother sighed heavily. She seems upset. About what? I do not know. The answer came too quickly. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Mom. My voice remained calm. Is something going on? Silence. Then, families go through difficult periods. I closed my eyes briefly. That sentence told me more than anything else she could have said. Families go through difficult periods. Not nothing is wrong. Not you are imagining things. A different answer entirely. That weekend, the real crack finally appeared. I was attending a charity fundraiser near Bellevue when Rachel approached me holding her phone. This is probably none of my business. That has never stopped you before. She smiled. Fair point. Then she showed me the screen. It was a public social media post. Nothing scandalous. Nothing shocking. Just a photograph from a restaurant. Chloe was in the background. So was Ethan. The image had been uploaded by someone else entirely. Neither of them knew it existed. What caught my attention was not the photo, it was the timestamp. Both of them had claimed to be somewhere else that evening, completely different places. Rachel looked at me carefully. You okay? I handed the phone back. Actually, I paused. I think I am. Because at that moment something became clear. For weeks I had believed I needed to expose the truth myself. I had imagined gathering evidence, connecting dots, building a case. Instead, the truth was exposing itself. One contradiction at a time, one careless decision at a time, one nervous conversation at a time. I was not watching a conspiracy become stronger. I was watching it come apart. And the most remarkable part was that I barely had to touch it. They were doing the work themselves. They were questioning each other, distrusting each other, correcting each other, protecting themselves. Every move created another crack. Every crack let in more light. And somewhere beneath all of it, a larger truth was beginning to emerge. Whatever secret had brought them together in the first place was no longer strong enough to keep them united. The strange thing about healing is that it rarely begins with closure. It begins with exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The kind that settles into your bones after carrying questions for too long. By the time autumn arrived in western Washington, the constant tension that had followed me for weeks had started to fade. Not because every answer had appeared, not because every conflict had been resolved, simply because I had reached a point where I no longer wanted my life to revolve around what other people had done. One Saturday morning, I drove to Bainbridge Island alone. The ferry cut through calm water beneath a pale blue sky. Seagulls drifted above the wake. Families stood along the railings taking photographs. Children pointed at distant shorelines. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew the story unfolding behind my smile. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt comforting. I spent the afternoon walking along the waterfront. Small shops, coffee houses, quiet streets lined with trees beginning to turn gold and amber. My phone remained silent most of the day. I had stopped checking it every few minutes. Stopped waiting for another revelation. Another contradiction. Another piece of evidence. Somewhere along the way, I realized I was no longer interested in winning. I was interested in peace. Late that afternoon, I sat on a bench overlooking Puget Sound with a paper cup of coffee warming my hands. The air smelled faintly of salt and cedar. An older couple occupied the bench beside mine. They must have been in their 70s. The man adjusted a blanket around his wife's shoulders while she laughed about something I could not hear. Such a small gesture, such an ordinary moment. Yet it stayed with me. Because real love rarely announces itself. It lives in quiet things. Attention. Consistency. Care. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn approval from people who had already decided how they saw me. Then I thought about the people who had quietly stood beside me without asking for anything in return. Rachel. Michael. Grace. Even strangers whose lives had intersected with mine through work I had nearly forgotten. That evening, Rachel called. "Where are you?" she asked. "Bainbridge Island." "Working?" "Not today." She laughed. "I am proud of you. For taking a day off? For remembering you are a person." I smiled. "That is fair." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. How are you really? I looked across the water. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon. Orange light stretched across the waves. I think I am finally breathing again. Good. Another pause. You deserve that. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time thinking about the word deserve. For years I had associated worth with productivity, achievement, responsibility, being useful. Somewhere along the way I forgot that human beings deserve kindness even when they are not accomplishing anything. The following week brought another surprise. A handwritten letter arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a short note from Grace Morgan. The handwriting was neat and careful. She thanked me for handling everything with dignity. She wrote that too many people allow bitterness to define them. Then she included one final sentence. The people who truly matter will reveal themselves when life becomes difficult. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I folded the note and placed it in my desk drawer. Not because it contained evidence, because it contained wisdom. A few days later, I visited the pediatric wing at a hospital that had adopted one of our healthcare systems years earlier. I had not been back in a long time. Nurses greeted me warmly. Several recognized my name. One of them introduced me to a young mother sitting beside her son's hospital bed. The little boy smiled shyly when I waved. His mother thanked me for creating technology that helped families like hers stay connected to medical teams during long treatments. I stood there listening while she spoke, listening to gratitude I had never expected, listening to a story I had unknowingly become part of. And suddenly I understood something that had been hidden beneath all the noise of the past few months. My real legacy was never money, never ownership, never contracts. It was people. Lives touched, problems solved, opportunities created, the things that remain long after arguments disappear. That night I returned home and opened an old storage box in my office. Inside were photographs from the earliest days of the company. Tiny rented spaces, folding tables, whiteboards covered in ideas, young faces filled with hope. I smiled as I flipped through them. We had built something meaningful, not perfect, meaningful. There is a difference. Near the bottom of the box, I found a picture taken during our first successful product launch. Everyone in the photo looked exhausted. Nobody looked wealthy. Nobody looked important. But every face carried the same expression: purpose. I sat quietly holding that photograph while evening settled outside my windows. The house felt different now, lighter somehow. Not because the past had disappeared, because it no longer controlled the future. And as darkness slowly spread across the water beyond the glass, I realized something else. The story that had begun with betrayal was no longer about betrayal at all. It had become a story about discovering who was still standing beside me after everything else fell away. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Winter arrived quietly that year. Not with a storm. Not with some dramatic moment that divided life into before and after. Just a series of ordinary mornings that slowly felt different. The investigation eventually reached its conclusions. The inconsistencies. The conflicting statements. The questions that never should have been asked. The documents that never should have existed. None of it ended with shouting. None of it ended with revenge. Life rarely works that way. Instead, consequences arrive the same way truth often arrives. One layer at a time. Ethan lost the trust of people who once respected him. Professional relationships faded. Doors that had always opened suddenly remained closed. Chloe discovered something even more painful. Reputation is easy to spend and very difficult to earn back. Friends became distant. Invitations became fewer. Conversations became shorter. Nobody needed to punish them. Reality did that on its own. As for my mother, age finally gave her something pride never could: perspective. We met for lunch one rainy afternoon in Seattle. Just the two of us. For several minutes, neither of us spoke much. Then she looked out the restaurant window and said something I never expected to hear. I spent so much time worrying about who needed the most help that I stopped seeing who was carrying the most weight. I sat quietly. She stared into her coffee. I should have protected you too. The words were late. Years late. But they were real. Sometimes healing does not come from perfect apologies. Sometimes it comes from finally hearing the truth. We did not solve everything that afternoon. Some wounds need more time than conversations can provide. But for the first time in many years, we spoke honestly. That was enough. My own life changed in ways that had nothing to do with courtrooms, paperwork, or investigations. I spent less time proving myself, less time explaining myself, less time chasing approval from people determined not to give it. The company continued to grow. New partnerships emerged. New ideas took shape. Yet strangely, those accomplishments mattered less to me now than they once had. Success feels different when it stops being your identity and becomes simply one part of your life. I began spending more weekends on Bainbridge Island, more afternoons walking along the shoreline, more evenings sharing meals with people who brought peace instead of confusion. Rachel remained one of my closest friends. Michael and I occasionally exchanged updates. Grace eventually retired. The last letter she sent me contained only a single sentence: "Protect your peace the way you once protected everyone else." I framed that sentence and placed it in my office, not because it sounded wise, because I needed the reminder. Looking back now, I understand something I could not see while living through it. Betrayal does not only break your heart, it breaks the story you believed about your life. The difficult part is not losing people. The difficult part is accepting that some people were never who you thought they were. But there is another side to that truth. Sometimes loss clears space for something better. Sometimes disappointment becomes direction. Sometimes the ending of one story quietly becomes the beginning of another. If you are listening to this and carrying a hurt that nobody sees, I want you to know something. Your value does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it. Your kindness is not weakness. Your loyalty is not foolishness. And setting boundaries does not make you selfish. It makes you healthy. There are people all over the world who spend years trying to earn love from those who only appreciate sacrifice. If that is you, I hope you remember this. The people who truly care about you do not require you to disappear in order to keep them comfortable. They do not need you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. Real love leaves room for both people to stand in the light. And if this story connected with something in your own life, I hope you will take a quiet moment for yourself today. Maybe share your thoughts below. Maybe tell us where you are listening from. Maybe simply remind yourself that your story is not over yet. And if you would like to hear more stories like this one, you are welcome to stay with us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, only if it feels right to you. Only if these stories bring something meaningful into your day. The lesson I carried away from all of this is simple. Never surrender your identity in exchange for someone else's approval. A few weeks ago, I returned to the marina where everything began. The same water, the same docks, the same distant lights reflecting across Lake Washington. I stood there for a long time watching the surface move beneath the evening wind. In my pocket was an old photograph from the early days of the company. The one I found in the storage box. The edges had started to fade. The faces were younger, hopeful, uncertain. I smiled and slipped it back into my coat. Then I looked across the water and realized something that would have seemed impossible months earlier. I no longer wished any of it had happened differently. Not because the pain was necessary, not because the betrayal was justified, but because surviving it taught me who I was when everything else was stripped away. The fairy lights moved slowly across the darkness in the distance, calm, steady, certain of where they were going. And standing there beneath the cold evening sky, I finally understood that the strongest people are not the ones who never get betrayed. They are the ones who refuse to let betrayal decide who they become. Thank you for spending this time with me. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you feel a little less alone, a little more understood, and a little more confident in the quiet strength that has been inside you all along.